we high-fived and hugged, and I said, see, your old mum does know. And she goes, clearly you've been bogged before, mum. And I thought about it and I thought, yeah, I have been. I've been bogged in my car. I've been bogged in the ambulance. Yeah, I have experience to draw on. And that's just living. That's just called living. I often find myself reflecting on the question, what are we waiting for? And in that, I also reflect on some of my experiences as a paramedic when I worked out in the, remote locations out in the high country, which I did for quite a number of years. When I used to speak to search and rescue squads, they would have a little chuckle about, working with us, with paramedics, because they had this saying called hurry up and wait. So they'd hurry to a scene, they'd get their, volunteers together, they'd drive out lights and sirens to a scene, and then they'd find themselves waiting, waiting for being invited in, or when we were ready to get their help. And so I reflect on that a fair bit, and I feel like we spend a lot of our time in our lives doing that. We spend so much time hurrying to work, hurrying home, hurrying to pick up kids, and don't know about paying bills, but we know that that's on the agenda as well. We run home from work and we hurry up to make dinner to make everyone happy and just to get through another week. We wait for Friday. As a paramedic, we didn't really do that because we worked shift work, day shifts, night shifts, afternoon shifts, weekends. So we often forgot what day's Friday. But what we did wait for were holidays, a break. You find yourself sometimes as a parent, while celebrating your children's ages and their milestones, you're also waiting for them to get older because, well, what else is there? We wait for our lives to settle down, and we sometimes wait for life to get a little bit easier. And then in our 50s, which, I'm closer to 60, we look up and we realize an enormous part of our life has already happened. And it astounds me to think, how did we get here? So I have to ask myself exactly what are we waiting for now? Now. So it's early morning and I'm sitting on the train heading towards Melbourne, and it's still quite dark outside. As I've made my coffee, my collagen coffee, which I love to have every morning, and for once there's nowhere that I need to rush to. It's been 3 years since I left the organisation that I worked for 28 years, 40 years in the health profession altogether. At 55, my health was finally at a point where it changed the direction of my life. And perhaps I thought now I would have to work out what came next. And to be honest with you, I haven't. I've applied for jobs and been overlooked. I've sent in applications like maybe many of you, and sometimes, most times, heard absolutely nothing back. It's an interesting experience after working for so many decades to go from being experienced and capable and a leader and an expert in your field and needed to wondering whether anyone can see you. So I've crafted my own business from qualifications that I passionately qualified for and studied for many years ago. That's one thing we do well as Gen Xers is we adapt and we're very resourceful. You may have heard me say that before because I really mean that and I feel it. Just because something worked for us one season of our lives doesn't mean we're required to carry it forever. Outside of the train window, the darkness slowly starts to lift and the countryside appears. I love this part about the region that I live in. It's so diverse. There's canola fields, which, in itself is questionable, but they look beautiful. There's beautiful stretches of yellow and gold catching the morning light. And we kind of forget about these things, even when we live so close to it. And I've travelled this way many times before over the years, but this morning I'm just really looking because I'm not in the driver's seat. And I wonder how many sunrises like this I've missed. And it's not because they weren't there because they've been there every day. It's just because I've been busy. So in those busy decades, busy raising children, having a career, paying a mortgage, shift work, responsibilities, I didn't have to do it. I love doing it. And probably like you did too. But do we keep on doing the same thing now? I know that there were many Christmases and birthdays I spent working as a paramedic, and my children are not resentful about that, and neither am I. And in fact, they're really proud of me, and so am I. I'm so proud of me for having the commitment, and also that those days for other people that I attended, that was often the worst day of their life and the most vulnerable day. So I have no regrets, not about those things. There were some years where just getting everyone through things felt like a real achievement. I had a very athletic son, still do, a very athletic son. He was 12 years older than his next sibling. And so often I would pack the car either on a weeknight or a weekend and drive around to the football. And because the girls were young, we could just pack a picnic basket and a picnic rug and activities, and we would just go around to all the different football places that we had to go to. And again, thoroughly enjoyable. So that was like so many parents finding themselves doing that. It's a busyness at the end of the week, and it is an achievement in itself. I remember telling myself earlier in my life when I was struggling with energy and fitness and being overweight that I just had it in the back of my head that when I'm retired, I'll have time for all these things. And luckily for me, I've recognized that earlier and I have put things into place to get fitter, lose the weight, eat better. Uh, and and I tell you what, I was kicked up the butt with a few things with my mental health and my physical health. I couldn't wait. I had to do it, and I had to do it now. And I still have to keep on doing it now. I also believe that I would slow down later. I might travel later, uh, and I would work out what I wanted. And later, it's all later. I would enjoy life a little bit more later. Later is such an innocent little word. Have you used it before? Yeah, me too. Until you work out that later it isn't endless. This train, I've watched the sun come up over the fields of the canola, and it does remind me of Vietnam, of traveling alone and walking for hours and watching the sunrise over the beach, taking trains through the country where nobody knew me. I couldn't speak a word of the language except for Xin Chao and come on, which is hello and thank you. And for a while, I wasn't anyone's mum or paramedic or practitioner. I wasn't a business owner or the woman responsible for making everything work. I was just me, just little old me. And I remember how free that felt. Little tinges of guilt sometimes about even feeling those things, which is crazy. Why should we feel like that? And perhaps that's what I've been trying to find again. Not Vietnam, not going overseas, not escaping or running away, but me. And the truth is, I've been decluttering my home, the cupboards and the rooms, things that accumulated over the years of living, things that I've carried from one house to another. And the more I can clear away, the more I realize that I'm not really trying to create a tidier house. I'm trying to work out what I want to carry into the next chapter of my life. And that's much harder because some things don't fit into boxes. Do I want to keep my home? Well, yes, the fact is I do. Do I want to keep my business as a women's health practitioner, doing lymphatics and nutrition and hosting women's mentor groups? Yes, yes, I do. We spend our whole lives trying to get somewhere, but where? Honestly, where? I did the career like you, like many of you. We did these things the career, the raised children, bought the house, we worked incredibly long hours. We survived difficult years. We've done the sandwich generation. We've raised the kids on one side and possibly helped our parents or in laws on the other side. And perhaps we've buried them as well. We've survived difficult years, no doubt. I did so many of the things that my generation were told that this is what responsible adults do. Now I'm here, 58 years old, standing in a railway station with thousands of people rushing past me, wondering what I want for the rest of my life to actually feel like. I'm in Melbourne today for something really precious. And actually, it's the third time I've gone to Melbourne in 7 days. I'm spending time with my son and daughter-in-law as they prepare to become parents for the first time, with my first grandchild. After some heartbreak along the way, which I also experienced in early pregnancies, many, reaching this point feels really precious. My 3 children are all grown now. Their lives are taking shape in different places, nationally and internationally. We are incredibly close, and I'm incredibly proud and grateful. And yet, strangely, I can feel pretty alone, which is a big admission. And I acknowledge that those two things, those two emotions, they can exist together. And perhaps that's another conversation that we need to have on another day, maybe next time. When you find that your children or your family or maybe your friends or whatever it is that you've been spending your time with, and for you it may not be children, because not everyone has children. It might be a career or a passion. But when it no longer needs you in the same day-to-day way that it once did, there can be an enormous space left behind. And that might be your company, it might be your profession. Maybe you've built it up so well, and the foundations and the templates so well, that you're on the sidelines looking in now, overseeing it. And it just keeps going, without, it's a great place to be. It's a very, place to be very proud of, that you've produced this and you've been able to do this and people put so much trust in you. But what do we do with that space? Later in the day, my son and I have lunch together, just the two of us. And he tells me how grateful he is that I'm his mum. He talks to me about their new little baby that's on their way, and he makes it very clear that they want me there. It makes sure that I understand that I have a place within that family, and that I matter. Now, you might find that's really strange that a son would say that to his mum or to the new grandma. But it shows me that he recognizes that I'm unsure. I'm unsure of myself, and I don't want to cross the boundaries. I want to be invited in, and he knows the importance of that. And that's so beautiful. It's so much insight and empathy, and I love that about him. Maybe like you, I have spent many years wondering whether I was doing motherhood well enough. I really have. I divorced 20 years ago when the kids were young. I worked shift work. I missed things. There were birthdays and Christmases and family functions when my ambulance roster determined where I would be. And there were mistakes. There were plenty of them. And yet somehow all of these years later, here we are, connected, respectful, and close. I've realised that perhaps the things that mattered the most weren't the things that I thought I was getting wrong, and that it's possible that they remember things differently, and they remembered the most important thing, and that was being loved. And there's something else that I've been thinking about too. I'm post-menopause now. Woohoo! Yay! The fact is, if you're a lady and you're post-menopause, well, you sit there for the rest of your life. I specialise in menopause. I'm an accredited menopause practitioner. And so I know a lot about this. Post-menopause is a beautiful community place to be, a lot of wisdom. You may not feel it at the moment, but that's where you sit for the rest of your life. You sit in post-menopause. The years of creating and raising our own babies have passed. That's our reproductive years. They've passed. But that doesn't mean we've become less important. In fact, so much more important. And perhaps, I too have to recognize that my place is simply changing. I'm becoming one of the older women in the family now, which is crazy. The woman who has experience behind her, the woman who has lived through changes and just lived through things. And I have such a funny story about this. And I can see the value of that so easily in other women, the women that I mentor every day, the women in my grounded circle. But I struggle to see it in myself some days. I have a funny story about being the woman who has experience behind her, because only last night My my daughter had a little bit of a mishap in a car park, and it was dark when she drove in there, and it'd been raining so much here lately, and it was muddy. And she rang me like, "Mom, I'm bogged," and she said, "Oh, I'm going to have to ring Dad." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "'Cause I'm bogged. I'll have to get Dad to help me get out." I said, "Let's have a go at this. I'm sure we could do something." And so I had some old boxes in the back of my car because I've been decluttering. And I took everything out of the boxes and I said, "Here, you tear this one up and I'll tear this one up. We want a big piece of cardboard." And we had two each and we went around to all of the wheels and we just jammed it under the wheels. Nice big pieces of cardboard. Sure enough, slowly she moved the car onto the cardboard, and in front of her there was some gravel. So I said, "Okay, faster now, put your foot down." And so off she went, and she got her car out of the bog. We high-fived and hugged, and I said, see, you're all Mum does know. And she goes, "Clearly you've been bogged before, Mum." And I thought about it and I thought, yeah, I have been. I've been bogged in my car. I've been bogged in the ambulance. Yeah, I have experience to draw on. And that's just living. That's just called living. I'm on the train again heading home from Melbourne, and the train is pulling out of the city and Melbourne starts to disappear. The buildings are starting to thin out and the skies are opening. It's getting quite dark out in the countryside. I still don't really have any answers, and I don't know where eventually I'll live. My kids are going to be all over the place in either Australia or in Queensland or Melbourne or, in Nepal. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I just know that I have a home right now, and today's what matters. I love my business and I love my ladies that I work with, and I don't know what it will become. None of us ever know. I don't know what life or work will look like in 5 years' time. I'll be well and truly into my 60s by then. But you know what? Perhaps it's not actually the problem I once thought it was, because I'm beginning to wonder whether this stage of life is less about finding the next thing to rush towards, more about finally stopping long enough to notice where we are already. We hurried through our 20s trying to establish ourselves, our 30s raising families and building careers, and through our 40s keeping everything together. And when we arrive here in our 50s or 60s, and maybe we're still waiting to lose weight or have enough money, waiting for the house to be finished, waiting till we're feeling more confident, waiting until someone chooses us, waiting until we know exactly what comes next. But what if this is it? Maybe it's more about how do I want to live while I'm working it out? Because I don't want to spend the next 10 years waiting to begin the next 10 years.